Hello and welcome once again to the Fair Game podcast, We Love You Football. I'm Graham Miller, and in this episode we're focusing on one of our key Fair Game pillars, namely helping to create female-friendly football clubs. It follows a successful day of discussion and workshops where we explored the extent of the issues involved and, importantly, how best to define what needs to change to make the game female-friendly and truly inclusive. We'll hear from Lucy Powell MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport in just a moment. But first, as usual, let's bring ourselves up to date with the latest Fair Game news from CEO Niall Cooper.
Thanks, Graham. So it's been a really busy week here at Fair Game. One of the big bits of news is the arrival of Swindon Town as the latest club to join our numbers, and we're hoping to get a few more over the line in the next couple of weeks. Meanwhile, there's been loads of political engagement as we seek to change football for the better. Firstly, by the time this goes out, I will have met Tracy Crouch at an exclusive dinner. Tracy, as you know, is the key architect of the family review, and the former Conservative minister still carries an awful lot of weight within the party. And to build on that, we will also be meeting the current Sports Minister, Stuart Andrew, in mid-July. But obviously, it's not just about the Tories. There are loads of political parties and political influences that we need to achieve if we are to reach our goals. And on Thursday, 29th of June, we've set a meeting with several senior Liberal Democrats, including Lord Addington and Lord McNally, key members of their DCMS committee. Then, of course, there is the main meat of today's podcast, female-friendly football clubs. And part of that is Labour's Lucy Powell. And also then, in the end of the month, we'll be talking to the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham. So remember to tune into that one. Of course, I can't let this podcast go without mentioning this weekend. And AFC Wimbledon are holding a heritage weekend marking the 21st anniversary of the club's rebirth with a unique play and, to be honest, the launch of my book, Womble Till I Die. I'll be there signing copies at the ground from 2 p.m. on Saturday. It will also be the subject of next week's podcast. So don't forget to tune into that one as we explore and talk to some of the key people involved in the recreation of the club. Away from that, we're still building up quite heavily towards the launch of our Fair Game Index, which we're hoping to have out in early July, and the numbers and the figures are working brilliantly for that. And I've seen a couple of the beta versions of the index, and I already have a good idea who's likely to come out on top out of the 92 clubs in the Football League and the Premier League. So I'd love to have your speculations on which that club might be. And of course, there's always the opportunity to come and help with Fair Game. And we're currently looking for some new club engagement officers. So if you're interested, don't forget to look at our website, fairgameuk.org, or drop me an email on niall.cooper@fairgameuk.co.uk, and we can have some conversations about that and how you can get involved with Fair Game. But that's the new update from me. And now back to Graham.
Many thanks, Niall. Now let's hear the closing session from our Creating Female-Friendly Football Clubs webinar. Lucy Powell MP is the interviewee, and in the chair is the CEO of FC United, Natalie Atkinson.
Good afternoon, Lucy. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to join this incredible session we've had today on a Sunday. As we said, a number of hours of debate and conversation about how we create and how we campaign for female-friendly football clubs. And we started off today's conversation with some really shocking statistics in terms of sexist abuse that female fans have suffered on the terraces, online, to their faces and so on. And this research was done by a brilliant organisation, Her Game 2. So Kaz May, one of the co-founders of Her Game 2, spoke earlier. And the statistic was 92%, just over 92% of women had suffered sexist abuse whilst being part of something that they love, they enjoy, they go to each week, probably going from when they were kids, and stood on the terraces. And we have to stop that. And Her Game 2, Fair Game, and the people that have been in the room today, we want this collective voice around how we stop that. So my first kind of question was, how do we stop that? And what's your thoughts on how we campaign collectively and have a wider voice around sexist abuse on the terraces and online as well?
Well, thanks, Natalie, and thanks so much for having me today. This is such an important topic and one that's sort of close to my heart, and it's sort of no surprise really that it's fair game and her game too. I'm going to look up that now after this call as well, and yourself are sort of leading that. Natalie, you're one of the preeminent women in football that I know, and so it's great that you're doing it. I mean, how do we stop it? Well, that is the sort of $1 million question, isn't it, really? And I don't think there's any one thing we can do to stop that. I mean, those statistics are really shocking. I mean, much higher than I would have said they were high, but I'm not sure I would have thought they were as high as 92%. And I think that's also a reflection, because football's often a reflection of what's going on in society at large at the time as well. And we've seen, because part of my brief obviously is sport as shadow DCMS, but other part of it is shadow digital secretary as well. So I've been dealing with the online safety bill and all the stuff around abuse and problems in the online space, and misogyny and hatred towards women is a really growing issue in the online space. It's not something that we sort of have dealt with 30 years ago, and it's not really there or happening. It's now a really growing issue, and something we've been campaigning in Parliament to get misogyny online as a hate crime, as an actual part of this new online safety bill, but we haven't been successful so far with that. So I do think we have to tackle it in all forms, online, offline. And I mean, how do you do that? I just think it is really hard. I think you have to be clear that it's a whole cultural thing. It's a strategic thing. It's something that requires women to lead, with men supporting, not just sort of men doing to women, and or men thinking that this is a sort of tick box exercise and we kind of need to, have a couple of women on the board, or have a tokenistic sort of representation at certain levels of a football club. I think you have to be clear that you're trying to create a whole different value set and culture in a place. And I mean, that from the work you do, Natalie, how hard that is to create those kind of cultures and value sets. So it does take long-term strategic, bringing everyone together. But I think part of that is to start with some of the campaigning that you're doing, raising awareness about how bad the problem is, and also what the benefits are from actually having a more inclusive and fair kind of involvement of women in a football club. I mean, it can be transformationary in terms of decision making, culture, behaviour, volunteering numbers, all of those kind of things. So it is a kind of no-brainer, but it is going to take a big concerted effort, and perhaps, as I say, a lot more attention and campaigning, as we've seen in the past when we kind of come across some statistics like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that then goes on to the point that we've discussed today, in terms of there's the review in football that's taken place, and I know we've spoken about that a lot, and how you're championing that independent regulation in football. One of the things we've talked about today quite a lot around values in football clubs. So how do we change the governance within football clubs, and how are we more kind of stringent with football in terms of what governance looks like? So championing good governance across the board, and those values then devolved across the football club. So, I mean, what's your? I know you've been on this journey of independent regulation and the fan-led review and good governance and sustainability in football, but what does good governance mean to you? And from a kind of I know what football club you support, as I do, so we're kind of championing what's happening across the land in terms of football as a collective. But in terms of governance, which is a really key point and a really key journey for us to go to, particularly with this fan-led review and the independent regulator coming, what's your thoughts on good governance, and what does that look like?
Well, yeah, it's a really important question. I mean, yes, I fully support the independent statutory regulator for football. I think it's long overdue. I think football has had a long time to sort of self-govern, and that's not worked, especially what we've seen in recent years with clubs going under or on the brink or nearly going under or having real problems. And one of the things that it is proposed in the white paper, which we're expecting to see as a bill in the autumn, and hopefully will then be sort of legislation by around this time next year, is that there be a football regulator come along and look at some of these issues around owner and directors tests. And at the moment, the white paper is quite focused on financial sustainability. Not on sort of wider governance issues, although obviously they relate. And definitely, I mean, I think, you know, it's my view that a more inclusive club and a club where fans are really at the centre of decision making and what's going on at the club, and where there's that diversity and there's that sort of culture around those values and people being involved and included, they tend to be the much better clubs, better run clubs, you know, and therefore more sustainably, financial sustainable as well, which will be the main test. You know, as that statutory regulator is established, I think there is a question for all of us and for you in football as well, as to how much reach you do or don't really want that regulator to have around some of those other issues, I think. And I think that will form the main part of the debate we have in Parliament about where that begins and ends. What role is it for the footballing authorities? I mean, even just this week, obviously we've had the Premier League's AGM. We still no further on really with the conversations about the fair financing of the pyramid and grassroots football. So I have had a few conversations with various people about that this week. But I know as part of those conversations, there are discussions about, well, if there is more money sort of going through the pyramid, which there should be, in my view, there should be a fairer distribution of the finances. Then how do we ensure that money is sort of is well spent and that clubs are well run? And you know, I think the sort of the cooperative model that obviously FC United is essentially that it's owned by members and run by members. You know, I'm a Labour and Co-op MP, so those values are very dear to my heart. And I think you know, should every single club be like that? Maybe not necessarily so, but I think it's probably at the pinnacle of involvement, isn't it? And everybody having a sort of say, and it means that clubs aren't just sort of run on the whim of one particular owner who might be gambling with the asset, or you know, or not have the community interest at heart or the fans' interest at heart and that kind of thing. So and having women more involved in that is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And the conversation today has varied from ownership models. It's then gone to having that equality and that good governance and that sustainability across football clubs. And is FC United's co-ownership model the right model? There are for and against arguments in terms of that. We know Germany has that that kind of model across all its football clubs. But what we've been talking today about is all of these things in terms of how football needs to change its narrative in terms of women involved, playing, coaching, volunteering, whatever your role is as part of a football club. So as a woman that's very much at the heart of what we're doing to change the narrative around football, what's your message out to people that want to get involved in football or are involved and are kind of struggling or want to make change? What would your message be to women in the game?
Well, look, the fight goes on, and you know, we have to work together and support each other in doing that. Making these kind of changes is never sort of easy, but it's really important to do it. And we absolutely deserve our own sort of seat at the table, whether that's as a chief executive of a football club, or whether that's as a coach or a volunteer or as a fan, or whatever, or as as mothers or sisters of the next generation and all of that as well. So change can happen when you do have a clear willingness to do so. We do need to get the blokes on board with that. So it's good that you've been sort of doing a bit of that today. I would say sort of behind every feminist, it kind of takes the men to be feminists as well, because otherwise it just makes it all that bit harder. So we have to persuade men of the virtues of this and get them along with it too. I mean, we had a bit of a similar thing in politics, 20, 30 years ago, where there were more MPs called John than there were women MPs. It's probably not that far off that now, but no, it's come a long way. It's come a long way. But one of the things we had to do in the Labour Party, which was very controversial, was we took very proactive, positive discrimination steps. So we had things called all women shortlists. So for some constituencies, half of the constituencies were only allowed to choose a woman to be their candidate to be an MP. And that really moved the numbers very quickly. So now of the Labour MPs, over half of us are now women in Parliament. And that's happened over 20, 25 years. But so sometimes you have to do lots of things, some culture change, some campaigning, some sort of, but you also have to have some targets sometimes as well, and actually try and move the dial more quickly by having positive discrimination, which some people see as very controversial. But there's been positive discrimination towards men for centuries, just by virtue of them being men. So we're just trying to make things happen a bit faster sometimes. So I mean, I just lay that out there as a controversial sort of suggestion, but there's always a mediocre bloke that can do the same job as an outstanding woman, in my experience in life, to be honest.
And I think
no disrespect to all the blokes listening, but I think especially in some of these settings and these environments where they are very male heavy, you have to be an exceptional woman to make a mark, don't you? Whereas you generally only have to often be a more mediocre bloke to be a coach or a
the narrative is changing very, very slowly. There are organisations like Her Game Too, like Fair Game, like Women in Football, that are discussing and campaigning and being at the forefront of change for women. But I think that what we have to do as a collective is have discussions like this, support from yourself, Lucy, and obviously your colleagues in Parliament to make those changes quicker. Change for me isn't happening quick enough. I am part of a very, very, very few number of kind of senior leaders within football, whether that's from the Premier League right through to non-league football. Let's not just talk about the 92. Let's talk about non-league football as well, because non-league football is becoming more professional every day. There's clubs in the division that we're in that are now full time. That was unheard of years ago. And although volunteers are the life and soul and heartbeat of football, change has to happen. I couldn't run Broadhurst Park on a group of volunteers. We'd love to, but change has meant that we've had to employ people. And I am very much at the forefront with that, particularly with our workforce at FC United, that there is a wide demographic of men, of women, of young people, of older people from the local area that are part of driving Broadhurst Park and FC United's vision forward. So the more we talk about that, and the more there are examples of that, like in government, like you've talked about, but the more we do that at grassroots level, the more change can come, and the louder we have a voice, I guess.
Definitely. But that can be very slow. And I suppose one of the differences is that there's no sort of collective way of delivering that, is there? Because it's lots of small or medium or large football clubs operating kind of independently. So you you sort of need individual clubs to maybe sign up to something that would say that they would have, let's say in 5 years' time that they would have 50% of their boards would be women. I mean, and that's the expectation in the government. It was a Conservative government, actually, to be fair to them, but obviously some of these expectations across public limited companies are now there. In fact, I think it's 25% of their boards have to be women, but even that sort of led to quite a big sort of recruitment during that time. And so now a lot of the FTSE 100 companies do have women on the boards. What they don't have, though, is still women as CEOs or women in the senior leadership team and things like that. But so I think it's got to be a combination. I'm not just saying the only way of doing this is to sort of get people to sign up, to get organisations to sign up to certain quotas or criteria like that, and you definitely get pushback for that anyway. But I think that isn't one tool, and it's one of the important things to sort of do along the way. Because even the most sort of progressive clubs or clubs that think they're the most, I think if they had a look at their boards, I don't know many women on football club boards, to be honest.
No, and I would agree. I gave that example earlier today, that FC United's board up until very, very, very recently was made up of all men from the membership, and there seems to be this kind of stumbling block to recruiting women onto boards, and what is that barrier? And I think there's quite a lot of work that Fair Game can do, and Her Game too, as to the makeup of boards. And yes, I think you're absolutely right, Lucy, that we have to put a quota on it. We have to let's put a percentage on this. Let's say within the next X number of years that all boards across the land in football have to have a number of women on those, or from a diverse community, because it's not just about women and men. It's also about diversity of thought. So young, old, different cultures, ethnicities, and so on and so forth. So that has to come part of this independent regulation and fan-led review, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, although at the moment that's not in scope of that particularly, but the independent regulator and what's sort of coming with that, already is coming with it. Is football is having to take a look at itself and hold a bit of a mirror up to itself, just with the notion that a regulator is coming, and obviously a regulator sort of being around. But at the moment, that isn't necessarily something that the regulator would have in their criteria. But maybe they should, because they're all symptoms and symbols of good governance and sustainability and all the other things that they'll be, financial sustainability, etc., that they'll be looking at. But equally, in advance of that coming on the books, maybe there is a bit of a campaign that starts to put a bit like we've had the living wage campaign, haven't we? And that sort of targeted football club. We've had stop racism in show racism, the red card campaigns. We've had sort of campaigns. So maybe now's the moment to sort of, especially we've got the women's review in football coming up. Yeah. We've got the regulator coming. Obviously, we've got the Women's World Cup and so on. There's just a lot more focus. Maybe now is the moment to start a campaign where there becomes this sort of public and club pressure for clubs to sign up to whether that's Her Game 2 and Fair Game joining together or something. I don't know, as a sort of campaign vehicle to say 25% of clubs' boards should be women. Do you sign up to that in the next? To achieve that in the next 5 years, and those clubs that have got a bit more ability to do that should begin that pretty quickly. And I'm a firm believer that if you have a target like that for women, then a lot of other kind of diversity does come with that, because what that means is you're holding a mirror up to the board. Just without thinking about it, really, you just ended up with these all white men boards. Yeah,
I absolutely, and I think that's a really, really important and poignant point for us to take on board, that we should be doing this anyway. Do we need independent regulation to tell us that we should have equality across our boards, because that brings diversity of thought, it brings new ideas, it brings fresh people to your football club that should be at the heart, that is at the heart of people's communities. So it's a really, really poignant point, Lucy. Thank you for that. So for kind of final point, was you've been a really big supporter of fair game, and we're kind of question back to you then is, will you continue that conversation with fair game? We hope you will. And to say a huge thank you for taking your time to be part of the podcast today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And yeah, absolutely. I think fair game, I was really impressed with the conference that I went to at Chester FC a few weeks ago, and all the work that fair game does to provide that leadership, that thought space for those clubs who sort of share these issues, share these values, share this outlook about the future of football, to come together and really fight for change, demand change, work on these kind of issues. So we have made, I think you have made a lot of progress in the last sort of few years, first with a fan-led review and then with a government white paper. I mean, getting a Conservative government particularly, I don't want to make it a sort of party political point, but like bringing in a new regulator would not be their ideology necessarily. So to have got to a place where even a Conservative government recognises the need for an independent football regulator, you can all pat yourselves on the back for the efforts that you've made to really bring these issues to the fore. But the job's not done yet. And I think, as I said at the Fair Game conference as well, it's not just about now getting the bill, getting the regulator up and running, really, I think, thrashing through some of these issues about where the line begins and ends, where does competition begin, and the role for the leagues and the authorities, and where does a role for a regulator begin and end. And I think that's at the heart of the conversation I want to continue with Fair Game and others as the bill progresses through Parliament. But also, as I said at the conference too, and we've just really highlighted here this evening, the independent regulator is not going to solve everything that's wrong in football. It really isn't. A lot of that change is going to have to come from the world of football. And I think having the spectre of an independent statutory regulator on the horizon now is perhaps driving some change and driving these conversations. So we've got an opportunity, I think, to sort of change things for the better for the long term. But I think, and not that any of you do, but don't just sort of think, oh well, I'll leave that for that other body to do now, and I don't have to worry about that. I think sort of far from it. Probably now is the chance to try and change a lot of other things for the better as well.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you for taking your time today. And that's the end of our podcast. Thank you very much.
Some really positive and forward-looking thoughts there from Lucy Powell, the Shadow Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and she was in conversation with Natalie Atkinson, the CEO of FC United. So thank you to you both. I'm Graham Miller. Ian Beach is today's producer, and so until the next episode of We Love You Football, it's goodbye for now.